Well, here we are. This is the end of the year. This is the very best of Mike Colón podcast as we chronicle all the interviews that we have done going back from July when I came back from my summer break that I took in June to now here in December. Or at least by the time you hear this, it'll be December. It has been quite the run. It has been quite a ride. We have done, hard to believe now, well over 100 shows, well past 120 shows. We're closing in at 130. And before long, having just eclipsed episode 100, it's not going to be long before we find ourselves at 200. So a lot of ground has been covered. I'm very proud of how far the show has come in such a short amount of time. The YouTube audience has grown exponentially, and the audio audience has grown exponentially as well. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Zoom has been a revelation for this podcast because now you can see me. It's one thing to hear me, but of course, with the invention of Zoom, or discovery, at least at my end during the COVID-19 pandemic, now we could bring you a video version. So all of that has been tremendous. And I'm glad that we've done these shows. I'm glad that we've had the time to cover these things like, police, fire service, news, and sports as in depth as we have. We've done deep dives. We've formulated miniseries. There's the best of the bravest miniseries with the FDNY. There's 2 NYPD miniseries, one on the emergency service unit, one on the bomb squad. Everything that has happened this year has done nothing but enhance the show. And I'm glad that you guys are here because the number one thing that has enhanced the show is, well, you, the audience. I am nothing without you. And so that being said, we chronicle everything. Of course, there was previous best ofs. There was edition 1 and edition 2 that I merged together, which chronicled every interview that I had done from when the show came back in November of 2020 to when I took my summer break in June. This particular best of, the end of year best of, chronicles everything I did from July when I came back to here in December. So without further ado, I will shut up and I will bring you the greatest hits as we chronicle the very best of Mike in New Haven.
It's an actual terrorist cell fomenting itself out of a mosque over in Jersey City. All right.
Right.
And there was a series of incidences leading up to the World Trade Center bombing that we did not make connections to. There was a bombing of a gay nightclub, a small bombing, pyrotechnic. There was a number of incidences that were leading up to this bigger thing. And then once they realized that they had the commitment of the members of this particular terrorist organization group, this cell, they brought in Ramzi Youssef from overseas, who was a really, truly trained professional operator. And he's the guy who organized, orchestrated everything around it.
And I believe there was also an assassination of a Jewish rabbi in 1990.
Maya Kahani.
Yes, that had a bit of a correlation to that too, because some of the same culprits involved in the 93 bombing were also involved in Maya Kahani's murder.
Right. The problem with the Maya Kahani thing is that so many files were gathered up out of the homes of the people involved in the Maya Kahani's assassination. And it all had to get turned over to the FBI, and then the FBI sat on it. And then they didn't look at them files until after the World Trade Center bombing. The files were sitting up at the Midtown North Precinct or something, because the assassination actually happened over in Midtown, and the detectives confiscated all these files out of the shooter's home, and then they had to turn them over. And when they turned them over, they weren't processed for intelligence worth. They just were left to languish until after the World Trade Center bombing. And it was the same group. It was same group. And I was working the night Maya Kahani got shot. And the supervisor of the bomb squad, Sergeant Gerald Hogue, knew exactly what that meant. And he informed me and the other members of the bomb squad working that night that we are in a new era, that something is.
I remember this wasn't in my firehouse, but it was another firehouse on Bedford Avenue. They had a guy that, a probie that got there, and he was, a bodybuilder. He was all ripped and everything. So, and believe me, the firemen have a gag for everybody that walks in the firehouse. And, so this guy's a muscle guy. All right, so we're going to get him. So they said, they say, you work out a lot? Yeah, I work out all the time. And, so they, they're pumping him up, so he can pump himself up. They say, one of the things we do here to see if how strong you are you take the ladder belt, which back then was a big thick belt of webbing, and it had like an 8 or 10 inch hook on it because you used to put the roof rope on it if you had a sled to make a roof rope rescue. So they said, well, you put the belt on, and then you go. Now on the old rear mount aerials, the aerial itself would stick about 3 feet in front of the cab, at about maybe 7 feet high, 7.5 feet high. So they said, they said, yeah, we had one guy, he could get to the front of the aerial there and pull himself up with one arm and then grab the hook and get it up there and then hook it onto the tip of the aerial. Let's see if you could do that. I think I could do that. So he puts the belt on. He gets pulls himself up, and he's struggling. He gets the hook up, and boom, now he has the hook on. Now the thing is, once you get that hook on, I don't care how strong you are, you're not getting it off. Because, so now he's hanging, and they're like, all right, get out of it. And now he's struggling. So now they're just laughing. They got him. So the chauffeur starts to rig up. They open the apparatus doors, and they pull his pants down to his ankles, so he's in his underwear. And then they shoot the aerial ladder out the front doors of the firehouse, dangling at the curb. Now he's at the curb dangling there with his pants around his ankles, and he can't get out. And they're like, welcome to the firehouse. You're going to sit there and tell us how strong you are and how tough you are. You can push 300 pounds. Now let's see if you can push a broom. I thought, you know what, this may be a good opportunity for me. So, I had reached out to, a few of the captains had reached out to me, which was nice because it felt that my career meant something. And these captains were looking, every captain wanted to try to find a few senior guys because they knew they were going to have all these young guys that needed to be mentored. So, I was fortunate that the 5 captains reached out to me. And like I said, I felt that to me, that validated my career for me. That, okay, you know what, I guess you did pretty good because these guys are reaching out. And I liked every one of the captains. I was friendly with all of them. But I chose 288 because they were starting a company with basically only one guy was remaining in the company from Engine 288. And he was a young guy. A lot of the other places, like half the guys were staying. And to me, I just thought that might be a little bit of a recipe for some hard times because you got guys that this was their company. Now all of a sudden it's becoming a squad. You got 12 new guys coming in, and it's like, well, they want to do things one way. No, this is the way we've done it for the past 50 years, and there's going to be some headbutting there. And I felt I already had my issues and disagreements when I left Rescue One. With 19 years on the job, I wasn't looking to get into any like chesty, this is my way or no way or anything. I just I was looking for a good fit. So 288, knowing Dennis was going to be the captain. Timmy Kelly, who I was a fireman with in Rescue One, was going to be one of the lieutenants. Vinnie Angero, God rest his soul, died of a 9/11 cancer. But I knew Vinnie from back in college days. So 3 of the 4 officers I was friendly with, and I knew that I was going to go in there and be the senior man of the company, which is basically like you're given carte blanche to set the mold on a lot of things.
Nobody knew if this possibly could be an accident or terrorism. So with that in mind, we were going to work as diligent as we could together. And we kept searching to see if there was any proof of an act of terrorism. So it's a very time-consuming, tedious investigation. So I told you about the bodies and how that was recovered. And then the lion's share of all the unidentifiable as well as identifiable parts of the aircraft were put on big flatbeds with cargo nets, still dripping of seawater, and driven with state police escort out to the Grumman hangars. So we had 4 big hangars to make use of. And the first hangar was where all the debris was taken to directly. from the Coast Guard station. It was lifted and lowered inside the hangar with these huge hoists that they had up inside the roof of the hangar that was made to move aircraft as they were building it and putting it together. Now we're using it in an opposite role, and it would be set down and then laid out gently, and this whole joint team would meticulously move forward and examine each and every piece. I mean, pieces as smaller than your fist. I'm not able to say with 100% knowledge that absolutely just this happened. I can't. And I don't think anybody else can either. But there's, like you said, there's two camps. There's two camps. Even within the NYPD bomb squad, there was a number of us. And listen, these guys, I respect every one of them. You know, they got the same credentials as me and same kind of experience professionally. That, listen, I respect what you think. That, yeah, it was truly a catastrophe, an accident. I call it the perfect storm that came together with, as you described about the history of the aircraft, you know, in recent times. But yet, those 100 people in particular, those military pilots, combat pilots, I was never fully comfortable with it. Never fully comfortable. But there's no way to prove either way at this point.
So he gets me changed. And it's kind of a funny story. So now we're going downtown. He's escorting me downtown. I'm in the back of the IAB car. Mike is sitting next to me. He refused to let them cuff me. And, you know, we're sitting there and there's a lieutenant and a sergeant driving, the lieutenant, you know, next to him. So we're heading down. It's like, you know, it's still in the morning. We're heading downtown and it's gridlock traffic in the FDR Drive. So I lean over to Mike and I said, this is what a great guy Mike is. So I lean over to Mike and I'm like, listen, I think I'm going to make a run for this. He goes, you're going to make a run? Where are you going to go? So I said, not to jail. So he says, he goes, well, you better, you know, hit me. Don't break my jaw. You know, like he was like, okay, you want to run, go ahead. So, but he told me, he goes, come on, we're Manhattan cops. We know these DAs. Let's talk to these DAs and tell them what happened. Okay, fine. So we get down there. I get to central booking. So I made a lot of arrests. So I knew everyone down there. So I walk into central booking. Now I'm in plain clothes because he broke my clothes. And I'm walking in, I'm not cuffed. And one of the guys who knows me is like, hey, Murray, what do you got today? I was like, yeah, I'm the customer today. You know, I was with the lieutenant. So they processed me. They put me in the back. There's a room called 132 is the police room. They kept me in there to keep me out of the cells. And then I get arraigned, I get ROR'd, and I'm released. So what an incredible night. You know, I was just so shocked, you know, like, and I had such a great career up to that point. I was having so much fun on the job. I went through a traumatic series of events. I recovered and I felt, you know, that I was capable of fighting. So I had a great doctor who came to the medical board, fought for me, explained my condition. She was with me the whole time, whole treatment time. And I won. And they restored me back to full duty with a firearm. So that stigma that used to be there is not there so much, you know, and I can't say they'll do that in every case, but I was able to demonstrate, you know, my recovery and competency and, you know, that entrusted them to believe that I was, you know, capable of carrying a firearm. And I did. I went on and continued my career. And like I said, I worked with John. We were very active. But I'm telling this story to tell people you can get help. You can get treatment. You will have to surrender your firearms. You may need even to go on medication. but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you have a problem, call me. And I do. I have a number of people that, you know, I can't identify them, but they're active members who call me. They're in similar situations, and, you know, I am there, and nobody will fight harder to get you back to full duty if that's what you want and is it in your best interest. So I love that you're doing that and putting that out there, but I wanted to add to that
Please,
that people should do it. I'm a living proof of it. Not only did I recover and go back to work full duty, but then I retired and I went, because I had to worry about that with the bar. You know, I had disclosed that when I had to go to character and fitness, to my competency to be an attorney, like that was an issue. I had to disclose it. And they had no problem with that. I've gone on with my life. I've, you know, achieved success on several different levels, and you can
It's a two-part word, sports writing. Sports part, the easy part. I mean, a million people standing around at the bar can talk on some, you know, reasonably coherent sports. We know that, okay? And do every day. Somebody's doing that right now.
Yeah.
Talk radio has become the biggest format in radio in America, taken over from country. I don't know if you know that. And people don't know. The more stations that program sports talk than any other format in America right now. Okay. But writing, oh yeah, good luck. Tell how many people could go write a coherent game story in 45 minutes. The answer is not many. So, all right, now, I just happen to be a reasonably precocious kid with regard to reading as well as sports. My father was involved in sports. We can talk about that. That was the easy part. He would take me, for example, to a high school basketball game on a Friday night. And then I couldn't wait to get up Saturday morning to read the paper, to read the game account, to see how it was presented and what I saw, if it confirmed my judgment, or what did I learn that I didn't know about the game, about the people. So it was part of the deal for me always. And I read the paper, and also when I was 9 years old, I was given a subscription to Sporting News and Sport Magazine. You had to have Sport Magazine in the 50s. It was indispensable. Nothing comparable today. I mean, there's sports magazines, but they're not comparable to what it meant to so many people. And so you had your monthly sport magazine, and I had your weekly Sporting News. I was reading them when I was 9 years old, and I just happened to be, you know, I like the printed word. Now, to answer your question, the first thing I wrote was for myself, and I was 11 years old, and I sat down and wrote a column called The Sportster, I called it, and it was dealing with the grade school basketball league that I played in, and general observations about big time sports. And I was 11 years old. That's the first time I ever wrote anything for an audience.
I was offered and took the job for explosive specialist at LaGuardia Airport. So I was explosive specialist at LaGuardia Airport for approximately 3 years. So I went from 20 years in the police department. I went to almost 3 years working for Med-Ed, years working for the Department of Homeland Security. During that time frame, I got sick from 9/11, which led to a heart attack and led to open heart surgery. I basically killed everything that I ever wanted to do, and I just couldn't go back to work anymore. It was from 9/11, and I'm grateful to God that I'm still here, because I shouldn't have recovered from that surgery, but I did. I ask God for one more chance, and He gives it to you. You know, you got to respect that. You got to try to do the right thing. I made a lot of promises, and here I am. But I'm not the hero in this. The hero in this is guys like Danny Richards, Ron Richards, another guy from the bomb squad who passed, and of course Louis Alvarez. Louis Alvarez I trained, Ron Richards I trained, and more or less Danny trained me. So all my career came down after I got sick. That was it. There was no more for me. I wound up getting asthma. I wound up getting severe lung problems. But the real heroes are all the ones that passed away. All my friends that died in the line of duty, all my friends from the military, the police department, emergency services, all of your emergency personnel that gave up their lives. They're the true heroes, not me.
Looking at the TV, and I watched the second plane hit. And once that hit, I picked up the phone. As I mentioned, I called Mike Hansen and Charlie Delaccio. I said, let's go. We got to go to work. Grab a lot of stuff because we're going to be there for a few days. Probably within 5-10 minutes, I was out the door. I went to Charlie's first. Then we picked up Mike and we flew down Route 17, which people, you could really get the sense that people knew something really bad was happening because people got out of the way, you know, and I've been a cop at this point for 19 years. When you have a big rescue truck with lights and siren and they don't get out of your way. I'm driving down in my, whatever sedan I had with a small bubble light. People get out of the way. So, you got the sense that it was bad. So as we're getting towards, we're listening to the radio, the regular radio, we get to the George Washington Bridge and we're hearing reports that the tower is down. And what we're thinking is that, well, the top, maybe a piece come down, the top comes down but you look south down the Hudson and you just see black. So we arrive at, we fly down the west, the east side. We arrive at one truck in the 13th precinct. They mobilized as well. They had vans waiting because they knew this is what we do. So they were like, we got a van ready. You just get in. We're going to fly you down to the trade center. So we grabbed enough gear, rescue gear. We use Laracus and Roco climbing gear, with personal climbing gear. We put all that in, and we flew down to ground zero, down to the trade center.
One time, the kids got the call over the phone we're up on from Columbia. Say, okay, these guys got money for you. They're going to call this number, and that's not sometimes how we go up on the other phones because then they call from our phone to that phone. They're going to call, take care of it. And I think it was $500,000. It was 400, 500, something like that. So it's on a weekend now that this comes in. So now, only the guys in the plant in the wire where we monitor the wires are really working. Everybody else is kind of off. But we got to scramble. We got to get in. I'll try to make this short, but
That's fine.
the kid gets the call. They tell him to meet him. It was on a corner in Times Square. So now we're scrambling from home and everything, in our cars, get to Times Square, set up on the corner. Because a lot of times what we were able to do, again, these detectives that work for me were really sharp. They could spot the guy waiting for either us or for that, like in this case, for the kid, before the kid found him. And if we felt it was the right time sometimes, and it wasn't going to harm the operation, we would hit them before they ever made that drop. And it would never come to us. We'd never have to put it through or anything like that. But anyway, so we go to that corner, we're looking around, we don't see anything. The kid gets another call. Okay, come back over to it was on the east side somewhere. It was in the 20s on 2nd Avenue or something like that. Come over here. Now the kid, and he didn't have a car. He didn't know how to drive. So he hops in the subway. Now my guys got to hop out of their cars, leave him in Times Square, get on the subway with the kid and tell us, exactly where he is. And meanwhile, we're driving, scrambling to get over to the east side and the ones that would stay in the cars as quickly as possible. So we get over there, kid's standing around, he gets another call from these people. And we're looking around to see these people. We're trying to pick them out. Sometimes we can. These guys, we could never spot them. But they call the kid, they tell him, turn around, in the middle of the block, there's a brown car. The keys are in the car, keep the car. Now the kid doesn't know what to do. He's 16 years old. He's in Manhattan. He doesn't know how to drive, at least as far as he has no license. I mean, I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
And he kind of stands there like a deer in the headlights. He walks down the block. He sees the car. We see the car now, and he looks around. He gets back in the car. He calls the other bad guys back. Said, "Okay, I'm going to take the car." And I'm going to drive it around the corner, and I'm going to take the bag and leave the car. And they tell him, no. The car is a gift from us to you. Keep the car. So just to show you how sophisticated some of these people are, they had a car. They obviously had it registered to something that wasn't going to come back to anything. And that price of ditching that car was just part of the cost of doing business to be secure. So They never showed up in person.
They did it over the phone.
If they were there, we couldn't spot them, but they might have been there at all. So anyway, the kid gets in the car, sits there for about 20 minutes in the car behind the wheel, trying to figure out what to do. And finally, he takes the car and he drove up a few blocks by the Citibank building, Citicorp building, up in, what is it, 51st or something like that, 53rd. And he parks the car and he gets out and he takes the duffel bag out of the trunk. And it's a big heavy duffel bag. He takes it out and he starts walking to the subway. He doesn't know what to do with the car, so he just abandons the car. He starts walking. While he's walking to the subway, the strap on the duffel bag breaks. He's got like $500,000 there, which is heavy.
Yeah.
So now he's got to lug, he's dragging this bag, lugging it down to the subway. And now we have to send a couple of guys on the subway with him because he's getting on there with a bag with $500,000.
What could go wrong?
To go back, yeah. And eventually he's taking it back to the apartment, you know, that he picked up. But the funniest part was he calls his brother in Miami and he tells him, you know, what happened? Yeah, these guys, they called. He goes, it was just like the movies.
We had almost nightly debriefings on this investigation in the bomb squad. Whoever came back from that day over in Cavalton, I mean, we talked about what they saw and what they did and where the investigation was going from our perspective. While I was at Cavalton, while I was on the floor, I talked to everybody. I talked to the Pilots Association. I talked to the metallurgists. I talked to Boeing engineers, Pratt & Whitney engineers. I talked to people who were responsible for the avionics on the plane. I talked to machinists, mechanics, anybody who was helping NTSB trying to figure this thing out. And very early in the investigation, I spoke to investigators from England who came over. And, you know, we're about a week into, well, I can tell you, it had to be like a month into the investigation. And they set up a desk there and they had a model of a 747. And as they were bringing components, they would color in the 747. I says, wow, that's a great tool. You know, that's a great tool to see, because they were working from different debris fields in the ocean. And that became very important, like what part of the plane fell off first. And, you know, the left wing came off and that went over here. And, you know, a lot of different things happened. And I'm talking to the guy from the British equivalency of the FAA. And I says, what do you think happened? He goes, I think a missile went through the plane and ignited the fuel tank. I think a missile went through the plane and ignited the fuel tank. Right? As I said, that makes, you know, because we're not seeing like big explosive damage. So you know, maybe it was a small missile and it, you know, went through the center fuel tank or left fuel tank or whatever it was. But I mean, here's a guy who's fairly knowledgeable. He doesn't have any reason to lie to me, and that's what he told me.
In 1998, I'm Dominican, and the DR got hit hard by Hurricane George.
Yep.
Were you among the team that went down there to help out?
I was. Yep.
Tell me about that.
Well, that was amazing. We get a phone call. Just to back up a second, I remember right when FEMA was getting formed, 89, 90, somewhere like that, I get a phone call from my captain. And he says, we might be going to Russia. Are you in? And it was just, are you in or are you out? And no time, it's are you in or are you out? So I go to my wife, we might be going to Russia. And she gave me a look that told me that I would not have a house to come back to if I went to Russia. Because this is 2 weeks before Christmas. So, you know, if you're going to Russia to some kind of earthquake thing, you're not coming back for Christmas. So as it turns out, we don't go. But that was my first inkling that something like this might happen. So now we get the phone call and they're activating the team. We're going to the Dominican Republic. I'm in, let's go. So we get on a C-130. We fly down there, cops and firefighters. They bring us to the island. They put us into this little housing complex that was supposedly or originally built for an Olympic team, but never really occupied. And it was a stadium nearby. And we just got that place up and running. Once we were secure in our equipment, we started giving everybody around there, like the first night, it was super dark. There's no lights. There's no power on the island. We had a little generator in the back that they were trying to make sure the radios and everything were up and running. And all of a sudden, these men are coming out of the darkness, and we're scared to death. The cops don't have their guns. The only thing they had were dogs. And I think it was 1 or 2 German shepherds, protected all of us, because these men were coming out of the woods with bad intentions, but their bad intentions were good intentions because they want food and water for their kids and their family, and there is none. And they knew we had it. So we gave a little bit away. And then once we started getting resupplied, we were giving as much away as we could. So I ended up having a great time there under bad circumstances. I think the most rewarding day's work that I ever had was in San Pedro de Macorís.
Yep.
There was a baby hospital there, and the roof got partially torn off by the storm. And we got there, there was no power. The water stopped running and the roof was off. And when we left, between the cops and firefighters, we moved the roof from the bad section to the good section, had the water going again, and it had electricity. So, and with the minimum of tools, baling wire and screwdrivers is how we did the roofing. And I was never so tired and never so happy as when we went away, that the hospital staff was in tears that it was up and running again and they could take care of the babies. And it was like, yay. So
I appreciate you doing that, because my family's not from San Pedro de Macorís, but my family's from the capital, Santo Domingo. And yeah, I didn't lose any loved ones in that. This is about 2 years before I was born, and I'm glad about that. But nonetheless, I know that was a big mission that FEMA did, and I never got the chance to ask anybody about that until now. So thank you for diving
They
into
had
that.
passed us maybe by 25, 30 feet. So when I heard him say pop caps, I immediately got right behind my car. I pulled out my gun, and I saw that they had stopped, and I saw the guy reaching into his waistband, and he pulls out a gun. So when I started to duck, I started to aim at him. He takes the gun and he hands it to the other guy, and he pulls out a second gun. And when he pulls out the second gun, now I'm leaning on the car and I'm starting to aim at him. He aims right at me. And sure enough, I'm like, this guy can't be real. He's going to fire, he's going to start shooting at us. Sure enough, he starts cranking off shots. So I duck, and one of the bullets lands behind me. It hit the light pole that was behind me. So as crazy as it sounds, in that split second, they say your life flashes before you. I returned fire like a blind. I wasn't aiming. I couldn't even see, but I knew where he was. So I fired my gun like this, like that, so to speak. I was ducking and I fired back. And at the time, I thought I fired one shot, but when I checked my gun later, I actually had fired 3. So I fired, and there was the other 2 or 3 people who were on the sidewalk with me. 2 of them or 3 of them fired back as well. So now the firing stopped, and I saw a cloud of smoke, of gun smoke from the guns that were, they were next to me. And when the smoke cleared, I could see that they were running. So I leaned on the car, and I took aim and I fired a shot, and I saw the guy wince over in pain, and he kept running, and the other guy was trying to help him. And then the guy ran in between 2 buildings. There's 2 high-rise buildings there. He ran in between there. He hid in the bushes, and the other guy kept running, and he ran toward Brighton Beach Avenue. Now, the best part of the story is this. There's a cop up on the subway that's doing a late tour, and he's smoking a cigarette. He went out of the station. He's on the staircase, and he's watching the whole thing. He don't know who we are. He sees people, he's got no idea that, he didn't know us from District 34. We had just gotten there. He's smoking a cigarette. He sees the whole thing. He calls over at 10:13. He calls in the whole thing. He comes running down. We chase the guy. We capture the one guy, handcuff him. And then the responding radio cars, they come and they catch the other guy in Brighton Beach Avenue. They bring him back. They do a show up, and both of them are arrested. But it was a funny thing, because the guy's name, the main guy, the guy that was really started firing us, his name was Willie Witherspoon, and his partner was Eugene Huff. And Willie Witherspoon, I wound up going to the 6-0 as an NYPD detective later on in 1989. And I would run into him again, and he was this notorious drug dealer. You know, that shooting didn't stop him in his life of crime. As a matter of fact, when they rolled him into Coney Island Hospital, the night that we had the shooting, the nurse said, "Well, this is the guy that robbed me a couple of weeks ago." So he was identified in that
Funniest
robbery.
call you ever responded to.
Oh, funniest call. I got a funny one real quick. Me and my partner doing anti-crime middle of the summer. We're driving down Church Avenue. It's a Saturday afternoon, busy, a lot of people. All of a sudden, a car comes from the other side of the street, cuts us off. It's a livery cab driver, Chinese guy, jumps out of the car. He's got no pants on. I just got robbed. I put him in the car. They go that way, So now I start putting over the description. And he tells me who it is. I put over the description, male, 19 years old. What is he wearing? He starts telling me what he's wearing. And what they take? They took $60. Blah 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 blah. I go, Central, be advised, they took $60 and they took his pants. And the guy goes, no, they don't take pants. Hot in car. So it was so hot out. It was 95 degrees. This livery driver decided to take his pants off. And, I couldn't even talk on the radio. I was laughing so hard. But the guys eventually got away. We took a report, but I thought that was quite comical.
I mean, listen, in the heat, in the summer heat, anything goes. I can't blame the man.
It was so random how I got a column. Because after 1 year at the Post, I decided I wanted to write a column, and I went into the boss of the paper, Paul Sand, and he said, "I have a sports columnist. Get out of my office." So it was with love. And so Michael Burke was running the Knicks at that time, and I'd been covering the Knicks for the Post, and I got on very well with him. His best friend was Mike O'Neill, the editor of the Daily News. And O'Neill takes Mike Burke to lunch, and he describes what he's looking for to sort of balance out Young's increasingly sort of narrow view of the world. He's a great columnist, but he was becoming more and more to the right.
Yeah.
And Mike Burke, and I didn't find this out till years later. Mike Burke said, "I could give you a list of 10 people who fit the description of what you're looking for perfectly." And he said, "But there's this kid at the New York Post who's going to be better than all of them." And on his recommendation, I got a column at the New York Daily.
Going back, this is back in 2008. Even then, it was very taboo and very off limits to even talk to women, let alone bring them into a bathroom with an American male and ask them questions. So the women are pretty much off limits. We're not talking to the women. So that leaves you with the 3 or 4 Arab males. Well, based upon some of the information in the intelligence package, it might be 5 pages, it might be 50 pages. So I would know that before I got out there. But in the cases where it's just a silhouette, I have to get what they call positive identification first. I have to know who Ali is. Is Ali the 40-year-old man, or is he the 17-year-old kid? I don't really know yet. So some of the things that I would do was obviously ask them their name. How long have you lived here? Is your name Ali? No, my name's not Ali. Is there an Ali that lives here? But, a lot of times they would lie and say, no, there's no Ali that lives here. So while that's going on, simultaneously, the rest of my teammates and the Army is searching this house, and they're doing what they call sensitive site exploitation, which is a fancy word for searching a house. And they're looking for physical evidence that either shows me that there is a fellow by the name of Ali in the house, or something that's related to either an explosive device or financing or components that are used to assemble a bomb. So every now and then somebody would go and they would knock on the bathroom door and say, "Hey, Chris." So, and they knew not to knock on the door unless they had something that was either very important to tell me in a safety nature, maybe the cordon was collapsing outside, or they had a piece of physical evidence they thought would be helpful in terms of me being able to exploit this guy and break him. And every now and then the guy would say, "No, I'm just using this as an example. My name's not Ali." I would get a passport. "Wow, that looks like you. It says Ali. That's not you." And so you chip away at their story. And then from there, maybe other things are found that shows his criminality or his involvement in the insurgency. And you keep going.
My recollection, it was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And we found out later on that this individual had kidnapped a woman, brought her to an ATM, tried to force her to take money out of the ATM, and she wouldn't give him the PIN code. He raped her, threw her in the trunk of the car, and he was driving up in Astoria, I believe, towards the water so that he could dump her over the side. Two very sharp detectives from the auto crime unit observed the car, noting that it's unusual in this neighborhood to have anybody driving around that late at night when there's very little traffic at all. They followed the vehicle and they waited till he didn't make a full stop at a stop sign, so they had reasonable cause to stop the vehicle because it's required in New York. When they stopped the car, they approached the vehicle. As they did, the woman in the trunk started banging. They heard the banging in the trunk. They drew their weapons on the driver and his accomplice with him. The accomplice complied with the police directions. The driver didn't. He said, "I have a bomb. If I whistle, the bomb will go off." They very quickly shoved a mini mag flashlight into his throat, and they removed him through the window of the car onto the ground. They held him down. They called for help. We heard the call for help come over the citywide radio when we were in Manhattan, and we started out towards the scene immediately. I had worked in the area, so I was familiar. Joe Ahern and I were in the station wagon. We arrived a few minutes before the response vehicle with all the equipment. So when we got there, there was no other option but to go to work without the equipment. We held him down and we started cutting his clothes off layer by layer. And as we got to his upper torso and we cut the sweater off, we found wires around his neck, and the wires went down both arms to the hands. And had he put his hands together, that would have been to complete the circuit and function the device. He had strapped to his neck and shoulder a wire, and that wire was wrapped around the pipe bomb connected to the other wires, and it was held like a sling. We very carefully cut everything, and we found wrapped on the pipe itself was duct tape, and under the duct tape, as we removed it, was the batteries. There were 2 AA batteries. And when I said to Joe Ahern, I said, I think we best cut the negative first because of an incident that occurred a few years earlier in California where 2 bomb techs were killed when they were working on pipe bombs, and it had to do with a negative wire being cut, a positive wire being cut, but then apparently touched on something that was a grounding object, and it caused it to function. We were also concerned with the possibility of electrostatic discharge, ESD, that the static electricity in the winter that you can build up, and when you touch someone, you get a static discharge. That can also cause a device to function. And that was another of our concerns. But as we cut all of the clothing off of him, I turned around and he's yelling at us, "Don't touch me, wait for the bomb squad." I said, "We are the bomb squad." I said, "Where are you from?" And he said to me, "Croatia." I said, "Okay." Now, Croatians were very active in the 70s in other plots and bombings. Is that where he got his idea from? I don't know. But it was we had a successful render safe operation. The victim was taken care of, and the perp went to jail. I heard a plane go overhead. And then we heard the impact of American 11 hit the tower. Our office is just about a mile north of where the World Trade Center was. We heard the impact, and then the radio frequency, the channel just lit up with different units reporting a giant explosion, a plane crash, a huge fire. And I got up, Mike got up, I went for the radio and the keys, and we started out the door to the World Trade Center. We had not been requested, we just self-dispatched to the emergency. When we pulled out of our garage, which is on Charles Street, I turned west, and as we passed Hudson Street, I looked to the left, which is a northbound street. We had to go south. I saw the hole in the Trade Center in the North Tower, and I said, "This is no accident." So on the way down there, I'm driving down, and at one point we're taking side streets because everybody's fleeing the scene. We're using every access we could to get as close as we could to the Trade Center. I stopped just to the rear of number 7 World Trade Center, got out to make an observation of the tower, the amount of debris coming down. And at that point, my option was to go on VC Street to West Street, to where most all our emergency response would go to, the main entrance, or to the east side on VC Street near number 5. And I chose that because of that photograph that we had from '93. Didn't want to get caught in a gridlock because we were one of only 2 teams in the city that day that was working. And we actually, during the day, we were actually pulled from the scene to respond to other bomb-related calls in the city. And we left and then we'd come back. So we set up a command post at Church and VC. We had a telephone kiosk there. We called the operations unit. We set up a direct line. And I was standing on a corner and Mike was about 5-10 feet away from me. And I heard a roar and it was United coming through. And I looked up, and I know aircraft. I used to moonlight for the airlines. And the plane took an arcing dive into Tower 2 and went right through it. It actually disintegrated as it went through. And I dove into our truck. The door was open. I drove into the truck to get away from the debris. Mike headed north as fast as he could go. And the only thing I saw was the bottom of his shoes headed north. One of the engines in the street bounced in the street not far from our vehicle, and the frag from the engine that broke apart broke the windshield out of our truck. The landing gear from the part of the, I think it's the front gear, bounced in the street and bent our kiosk telephone booth down into an L shape onto the ground. So that was the end of our direct contact. I climbed out of the truck to survey the damage to make sure we were still operational. And Mike was coming back down the street at this point, trying to dust himself off with all the debris coming down. And the chief of detectives, Bill Ali, and his driver pulled up. And he got out of the car and he looked up. He said, "What happened to the other tower?" I said, "It looked like a 767, Chief." I said, "It was going so fast, I couldn't tell, but it looked like United Airlines colors." And he went right through the building. And he picked up the radio. This was at 9:03 in about 30 seconds. And he told the dispatcher on citywide radio, "Notify the Pentagon that we are under attack." And at that point, we knew this was a huge terrorist attack.
There's nothing elusive about him. He says it in that interview. So I always wanted to ask you this, especially after watching that interview. When you're sitting just mere feet from this man, who we know would be responsible for something even more devastating 3 years later, what's going through your mind? Journalistic curiosity or intense fear?
Yes. That was the answer, yes. I had written a list of questions. Did you bomb the World Trade Center in 1993? Did you plot to kill President Clinton in Manila? Did you have a plan to assassinate the Pope using Ramzi Youssef and his team? Did you know Ramzi Youssef? Did you know Wali Khan? I was trying to get him to talk about knowing about the plots, knowing the people that had been sent here to blow up the World Trade Center, and where this was all supposed to go. And the challenge as a journalist was they agreed that he would answer all of the questions because they had me write them down so that they could translate them. And I thought, some of these questions might be too provocative. But Zawahiri, his number 2 at the time, said, "No, he'll answer each one of them. We've translated the questions, go through them in the same order." And he was giving these very lengthy answers, but they refused to translate the answers to me in real time. So at the end of the answer, I didn't know what he'd said. So I didn't have the ability to ask the logical follow-up question or challenge the answer. I just went on to the next question. But if you looked at the questions, they were important questions to ask. And I was getting long answers. But, after the interview, you get to the translation and you say, well, what's in there? does he say he blew up the World Trade Center? No, he's cagey about it. Does he say he knew Ramzi Youssef? He says not before the bombing, which indicates he knew him after the bombing, since Ramzi was captured in a guest house owned by bin Laden, as you point out, Mike. But when you get to the heart of it, it wasn't about the individual plots or incidents. The real message was in the message. He said, I predict a black day for the United States, after which the states will no longer be united. I think what he meant was he thought after fighting the Russians in Afghanistan and watching the collapse of the Soviet Union, he could replicate that with the United States. He said, this will be bigger than our battle with the Russians, and that you will come to understand this when you leave our lands. He was talking about the US bases in Saudi Arabia, the no-fly zone over Iraq, our support of Israel, the Palestinians. He said, you will understand this when you leave our lands, when you are dragging the bodies in the coffins and boxes in your shameful defeat. And, I declare war on America. And this fatwa, meaning religious decree, is not just against those in the military uniform. Civilians are a target in this fatwa also.
Prior to the South Tower collapsing, I had a list of everybody, who they were and where they were going. And there's another ESU officer who happened to be off duty, Bill Lutz, who came by. He happened to be working in the area. And I happened to look over my shoulder, and I saw an officer that was supposed to be on Sergeant Collins' team, Wilson McCormick. And he was kind of walking back, and they had left, some time before that. So I started thinking to myself, what's this piece of paper I have? Are these guys not, who they're supposed to be with and where they're supposed to be? So McCormick basically said that Sergeant Coughlin had sent him back for a piece of equipment. McCormick's father was killed in the line of duty before I was in. He was an ESU officer. He was before I came into the unit. I think Sergeant Coughlin sent him back because he knew this was bad. He didn't, it was bad enough that, his mother lost a husband that he didn't want her to lose his son as well. So I had told McCormick to stay with me, and I would put him on another team. And probably less than 5 minutes or so, the South Tower collapsed. So, that was that divine intervention, was that John Coughlin, just knowing how bad it could be and looking out for him. I don't know. I knew John. I knew all these guys. We worked together, we trained together, we socialized together, we laughed together. We were a small unit. So it certainly saved his life. There were other officers from task force that were going into the building that were redirected out by our CO at the time, Inspector Watson. So it was important that we maintain control. When the South Tower collapsed, my job was to get the guys out of the North Tower, to radio them. We went from a clear day to basically from gray to dark gray to black.
That's the thing. I mean, the things that they've done make you feel that way, to where, to borrow an old line from Jane's Addiction, nothing's shocking. But then again, to actually profile him as so in depth, I have to ask, a little while after that interview, when he was executed by lethal injection, I imagine, obviously, having chatted with him, you felt something beyond, okay, well, that's the headline of the day. What did you feel when you heard that he'd been executed?
So Rick came over to my house. I lived in Los Angeles, and my daughter was not there. She was with her dad. And we watched the execution. Yeah, come on, honey, sit down. Let's have some Pop-Tarts and watch the execution. Not that it was filmed, but they were outside the jail. And obviously it was a big story, It's funny. I'll meet people now sometimes, and the Gacy thing comes up, and some people are like, who? I'm like, wow, that he probably was the most prolific serial killer in the United States. But in any case, well, what happened was interesting. I can't remember exactly the time that he was set to get the injection, but let's say it was 9 p.m. Pacific time, where then they expected him to be dead in like 15 minutes. But he didn't die. He didn't die for something like 2.5 more hours, which was just nuts. You're like, wow, this guy really is larger than, he is this large, monstrous character. But what I wrote and what I still think now is like, sure, we killed him, but we didn't. He goes on. Here we are. We are
27 years later, right?
talking about this. You and I may never have met had this story done. He continues to be part of the connective tissue and Americana. So, and why is that? Well, because we created him, right? So we maintain our fascinations for certain reasons. Who knows? But yeah, he died, but he's not dead, in a sense.
The legacy in its twisted, all its twisted forms.
Now the buses and the livery cabs have this yellow light in the front and the back. They're required to have it, and it's activated by the driver so that if there's trouble inside the car or the driver is in some type of a distress, he can activate it by foot or by hand and signal police officers as he's driving down the road that something is going on inside the vehicle. So after I get the elbow, I look up and I see the vehicle coming, and me and my partner are watching as the car is coming towards us. As we watch, the vehicle goes by, we're watching, I see the driver, he looks at us and he just had a look on his face like he saw a ghost. As the car goes by, we see 3 individuals in the back seat. Can't tell if they were male or female, but we knew that they were passengers in the vehicle. So my partner says, what do you want to do? We left the guy that we were writing the summons to. We were afraid that the passengers in the vehicle were robbing the livery cab driver. We make the U-turn. We go after. As we're going after the vehicle, me and my partner now are figuring out what it is that we want to do and how we want to handle this. I says to my partner, Randy, we'll put the lights and sirens on. We'll stop the car, pull them over. We'll make them think that it's a regular car stop. But as soon as that car stops, pull out your gun and run up to the back of that car and let's make sure that everything's fine and we'll deal with whatever happens once we get up there. But let's not just walk up to the car. Thank God we did that. We get out of the car, we run up, I draw my gun out. I'm on the passenger side, Randy's on the driver's side. We draw down on the 3 passengers that are in the back seat. It was 1 male and 2 females that were in the back. The male passenger was closest to my side. The windows were already down. So I told everybody in the car, let me see your hands, put your hands up on the headrest. They complied, put their hands up on the headrest. The passenger in the back, the male, was looking at me. And as I'm looking at him, he just had, Mike, there's no way for me to even explain it. He just had this sinister look in his eyes. Like, I can only describe it as him looking like the devil. As I have control of the 3 passengers and I can see their hands, my partner Randy takes the driver out of the car and walks into the back of the car to find out what's going on. As he's doing that, I have my eyes on the passengers. The male with his hands on the headrest in front of him starts to take his left hand and starts to drop it down towards his lap. And I start screaming at him, using not nice words, put your hands back up, put your hands back up. He listens to me again and puts his hands back up. As my partner's talking to the driver, again, he starts dropping his hands again. And I yell at him again, put your hands back up. Out of the corner of my eye, I see my partner going like this. And as I look over at him for a quick glance, he goes like this to make the motion of a gun and points. So I knew that the driver saw a gun on the male passenger that I have. My partner calls for backup. Thankfully, there were 2 or 3 other Brooklyn North Task Force cars that were right around the corner. Within seconds, they converge on the scene. We open up the back door and we extract the male out of the vehicle. He starts fighting with us. As he's fighting with us, I roll down and my partner roll down onto the ground with him. We get control of his hands and he's still trying to get his left arm back behind him. We get him. We're able to handcuff him. I do a quick frisk and I recover a .38 caliber revolver out of his back left pocket. comes to turn out, trying to make this long story short, what ends up happening is after the scene is controlled, we start to transport him and the two female passengers back to the 7-9 precinct. We find out from the driver that he pulled the gun on the driver and ordered him to take him around to different locations. As we're driving back to the precinct, I'm looking at the gun that we recovered, and I'm talking to a couple of the other officers, and we're looking at the gun, and I'm saying, gosh, this really looks like an NYPD off-duty revolver. We come to find out back at the station house, when I run the serial numbers on it, it was a stolen gun from a Brooklyn South Task Force police officer who, I believe it was a couple of weeks or a couple of months earlier, was moonlighting as a security officer in a pharmacy. This kid ends up coming in, laying everybody down on the ground, robbing everybody, and pulled the gun off the moonlighting off-duty police officer and stole his gun. Luckily, the off-duty officer that was acting as security didn't get shot or hurt, but he lost his gun. So we called him up, told him we got your gun. He said, oh my God, once we start doing an investigation on this kid that we caught, we found out that he was a felony parole absconder, wanted for homicide. He did a bid as a 16-year-old for a homicide. He killed another kid that it was involving a girl. There was some type of a dispute, and he shot another kid and killed him. He did a couple of years under youthful offender status, and they let this kid go. And he was on parole. Never visited his parole officer. He was an absconder. What we come to find out later on is that this kid used to sit in his apartment with a scanner, listening for when his parole officer would call him. He knew when his parole officer was coming to try and make contact with him to knock on his door. He would sit in a chair behind the door with a shotgun pointed at the door, waiting for the parole officer to break down the door or come in, not knowing what was going to happen because he was going to kill the parole officer. We then find out that this kid was wanted in connection with multiple robberies all around the city of pharmacies and electronic stores around the city, right? So this turned into, I think we worked like 23 hours straight on this case because the detectives got involved. They end up debriefing this kid. They get statements from him, the whole 9 yards. The end of the story is this. The detectives come to us and they say, okay, the TV camera's outside. You guys are going to do a walkout. This was a really bad guy that you caught. He's going to be returned back to jail, the whole 9 yards. We knew we had a really bad perpetrator that we ended up getting. We felt good that we recovered a cop's gun. Nobody got hurt, all good stuff. The detectives say, are you ready to do the walkout? And me and my partner were taking cat naps wherever we could because it was just an excruciatingly long night, right? So my partner says, yeah, we're ready to do the walkout. And I said to the detective, could you give me like just 5 minutes alone with the perpetrator? And the detective says, yeah, he's all yours now. We're done with him. Do what you want. When you're ready, bring him out. He's in the holding room, in the interview room. When you're ready, bring him out and take him down to central booking. So me and my partner go into the room, and I'm sitting there with the perpetrator now. And Mike, I asked him one question. I leaned over and I looked at him dead in the eyes, and I said to him, why didn't you do it? And he knew exactly what I was talking about. He looked at me and he said, let me tell you something. If you two didn't run up to the car with your guns out the way that you did, I was going to blow your brains out.
Well, it's funny. We always joke. My wife tells everybody I came down to, Florida because of Miami Vice. But watching that kind of did give me a little bit of a thought, Well, I work with a cop, Tommy O'Keefe, one of the best cops I ever worked with, from Boston. He was Metro-Dade Narcotics. He was really close with Michael Talbot, who played Switek on Miami Vice. So I got to know him. We'd go down when they were filming. We'd go out with him a lot. Even at one point, we were at the 100 episode party at the Biltmore Hotel, which was great. One of the agents I work with, DE agent, his niece was very sick. She was dying of cancer, but she went, she was from Texas. She went into remission, but prior to that, through Make-A-Wish Foundation, she wanted to go on the set of Miami Vice. I guess being in remission, her request didn't come through. Well, I said, wait, I know Michael Talbot through Tommy O'Keefe, and Tommy knows everybody. Don Johnson, Sancho Santiago, we knew everybody. We arranged to have him come down to be on the set of Miami Vice. And it's funny because, when you think of Miami Vice, everybody thought of Don Johnson, And when we got there, I was shocked. I mean, it was so nice. Don Johnson treated this young girl, because you always hear bad things about actors. He put her, at the time I think he was part of the, like the cast, not the casting, like the production and whatever. And he actually had her sitting in the chair. It was so nice, and people ask me, what's like the greatest, let's say, award or certificate ever got? And it was the letter I got from the DE agent and the family of how we were able to fulfill that girl's dreams. And again, it was because of Tommy O'Keefe, Michael Talbot, Don Johnson. I was just kind of like in the chain of command there. And to me, that letter, and she later passed away, but that letter means more to me. Even at my retirement party, they flashed it and they had a picture of us with the girl and with Don Johnson. And to me, that was the great part, which
I
people
see in
never...
the book, the quote lessons of the book are more inferential rather than frontal. They're not like, here are the 10 points, do this, do that, do this. Because it's important to see the flesh of how Marsha and I experienced her remaining months, so that other people can derive their own specifics in this approach. But what I would say, just loosely, first of all, my heart goes out to everyone that you just mentioned, all of the COVID, all people touched by COVID. I think I saw an amazing statistic that gets lost. I think some 600,000 people in the United States have passed already, have died. It's just incredible. There's no making light of it. And, some people, have cancer for years before succumbing. Some people, it's in remission and reverses. Some people are the victims of crime. My close friend was riding a bike and he had some brain injury, and it was so quick, there was no time to spend this remaining time I'm mentioning. I guess the underlying message, and it's not a quick fix, so I don't mean to be pulling something out of a hat. It's much more inferential and it's very specific to the person involved. But I think one big picture is that one's life is just bigger than how one dies. And one's life is bigger than even the negative circumstances we're going through now. Whatever they are, however bad they are, this is our life. We're all going to die. We're all going to be here for a short period of time, relatively speaking. And we have a choice to try to make the best of it. Some circumstances are really hard. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying, it's challenging. It is challenging. But this critical point of the way we die, or some problem, could be a business problem that we are subjected to, is a subset of our life. It's a subset. It's not our entire life. And we have the power to identify our lives the way we want them to be identified, and our loved ones who have died too. And if they didn't have the time to flesh that out, their survivors can. So I think it's, I found it, I'm changed. I'm deeply moved, by this, whole experience. And just a critical feature is that life is bigger than any one predicament or crisis or medical condition. And we, as hard as it may be, this is our life. we get to write it, or we get to write the legacy of people who have left us. And let's not shortchange it. Let's optimize it. Let's carry on that legacy. Let's make that life a blessing. Let's make our lives a blessing by carrying on that legacy.
CBS mornings with the change. You know, you look at the success of CBS Sunday Morning, which is known for great storytelling. And the thinking now is that we want to continue that through all 7 days of the week. So we pride ourselves on, and I love the phrase, exquisite original reporting and exquisite storytelling. And I think when it comes to storytelling and reporting, I think we are one of the best in the business. And we just continue that. I never want people to think, well, CBS mornings is part of News Edge, which we are, but I don't want people to think we don't have fun here. You know, I don't want people to think, oh, you know, it's the facts and nothing but the facts, because we have Nate Burleson, we have Tony DeCopel, you have me, and the three of us each bring a different sense of humor to what we're covering, to being at the table. So I want people to think you can come and you can have fun and not be a comedy show. Nobody here is trying to be a comedy show, and we can do that.
So, all right, what's plan B? We have to go back down. We have to go back inside the crown, right? The head. And we're standing there. There's six of us, and we're saying, you know, we're all, you know, we're throwing things off each other, right? We're saying, you know, listen, most protesters, all they want to do is make a statement. So if you go to like a Greenpeace protest, where they're hanging off the side of a building, all they want to do is get their banner out and make a statement. As long as they get that on the news, it's mission accomplished for them. Okay. So we said, all right, listen, let's just wait this out a little bit, right? And let's just see if we can convince this individual to come down, right? So there were these windows, they come out, right? You need a special tool. We had the special tool, and you can actually unscrew everything and take the entire window out. And now you got the frame, but the frame is only a foot and a half wide. Who's the smallest person? Pericone, right? So they said, all right, you know what? His name is Paul. Paul, why don't you see if you can go out? We'll hold you. We'll hold you. You're not going to go anyplace. We got him tied in. Go out there through the window and try to speak to this guy and make some, you know, try to, shake some sense into him to say, listen, you made your statement. It's on video. Everybody, you know, it's on the news. Come on in now, because I'm going to get hurt and you're going to get hurt. And it's, you know, we want to go home at night, you know, that type of deal, you know. And of course, I had to tell you, you got to say some choice words that I can't say on this camera, all right, or this podcast, right? Because you got to do what you got to do. Because if you don't put sometimes the fear into someone else, they'll just play you, all right? So you got to say certain things that to convince them to surrender and let's give it up, okay? Or bad things are going to happen, all right? So he's out there and he's trying to convince this person. And, you know, he's not coming in, he's going back and forth. And I'm not going to say who, but it was hysterical. So someone came up with the idea. I won't say who. Okay. Let's cut a hole in the crown. Now, we just sit there and we said, are you crazy? I said, and we're sitting there laughing, right? We're up, there's only six of us, right? And the person on top of the crown. And we're saying to each other, could you imagine tomorrow's news? Okay, that 6 ESU cops cut a hole in the Statue of Liberty, right? That would be the laughing stock of, honestly, our unit. All right, there's certain things you just don't do, right? And that's one of the things you do not, you do not damage a monument that was given to us. Okay, not to mention, the whole definition behind that monument, what it stands for, what it means, So anyway, long story short, Paul Pericone, he talked him and he grabbed him and then he pulled him through the window and he made the rescue that day. But to that day, we'll always bring up that story of an individual that wanted to cut a hole through the crown to bring him in from the inside, like cut out, like basically like, cutting out the ceiling, right? No, but we'll always, when we attend different functions, and we'll go to we have an annual dinner every year that we attend, or we go to 9/11, people, how they old timers are, they tell stories. That story is, we still get laughs out of it today. So that's the Statue of Liberty story.
I remember because I when he told me that when they suggested that, just that was his response too, that he said, and he cleaned it up for the show. He's like, "Are you out of your effing mind?
Yeah.
Do you think I'm gonna go to hold?" And right at that time, he added, the guy came in, he's Puerto Rican with the accent. "No, don't cut Liberty. I'll come in. I'll come in." And he came in.
Yeah. So it is a true story. Like I said, I try not to use any vulgarity. All right. In telling you some few choice words that we said, but yeah, Paul had a little bit more, add a little more flavor to it. I try to be professional in telling the story, but it was a really funny story because I can only imagine all of us would not have been in the issue the next day. We would have been transferred.
This insurance entity, the NCIB, I believe it was on National Crime Insurance Bureau at the time, had a major issue of cars being stolen and then transported overseas, in particular to Venezuela. So they knew that these groups were taking cars, high-level cars, Lexuses, Infinities, all top-level cars, and being stolen from dealerships, all kinds of areas, and then shipped to Venezuela where they would be put into action, put into place. So we would get lists and lists of VIN numbers for us to check. And every time I try, I would give it to certain counterparts that I worked with there. And I would always get back, "Oh no, these are negative. But so I developed a relationship with a particular individual who had access to these databases, and he took it upon himself. And this was a very dangerous thing for him, but he did do it. Took it upon himself to go identify where these cars were at. And he took pictures of them. He confirmed that certain VIN numbers. And so he gave me evidence that showed that these cars were being used by high-level government officials. So it was not so I brought that forth to the embassy, and the embassy did not really particularly have an interest in this because they didn't want to embarrass anybody, right? So they just said, "Listen, just make sure, try to get these back and forth." But that caused a major issue, right? And so the FBI, my counterpart for the FBI, also had a similar issue. So we got together and we started talking to our counterparts and talking to them and saying, "Look, we know these cars are here. We need to find them." And so it got to a point where we got, the prosecutors involved, the prosecutor's office in Venezuela, and they were saying, "Okay, give us your source." And we're like, "No, we can't give you our source, but we can tell you that these cars are here." So, well, we need to know who the source is and we need to know where these cars are. So we were summoned to a meeting at a high-level meeting with high-level individuals in the Venezuelan law enforcement community. And I brought my files with the evidence, and we sat there, and I didn't open them. And I sat there with the FBI counterpart, and we talked to them, and we said, "Look, we need these vehicles back." There were hundreds of vehicles, but they weren't going to give us these 100 vehicles. But we had identified 4 of them, or 4 or 6, I can't remember at the time, that had been specifically assigned to very high-level people there. And we said, "We need these back." They're like, "Well, how do we know they're there?" Whatever. And I said, "In these files, I have the evidence that they're there. I'll tell you where they're at." And I give them the locations. And they, poker faced, didn't acknowledge or deny. And we ended up getting those back, because we pushed so hard. We never gave up our source, but we were very much persona not appreciated there. But we ended up getting those loaded onto a container and shipping them back. And I don't know. And eventually we ended up establishing a mutual law enforcement assistant agreement with the country on the repatriation of stolen vehicles. That was signed into, and that was something very good that the embassy was able to accomplish with our Department of Justice and headquarters and their Department of the Ministry, I guess, in Venezuela. It was great, but it took a long time. And at the end of the day, if you really look at it from a case statistic value, we only returned 6 vehicles, right? And there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them stolen. And I'm sure it continued. There's a piece on either 60 Minutes or CNN, I can't remember, right? The reporters went down there. They had all kinds of, and they interviewed me and they interviewed a bunch of people about this situation. I think that took it to another level. And then the Venezuelan government got more involved in that. And but it was an experience working overseas.
Coney Island, all our vehicles, heavy vest, helmet, we're about to go do a hit. And we hear the 1013 come over, and it comes over as, that he lit the place on fire. Now, winds up that he didn't light the place on fire. He used a white smoke grenade. So, in reality, I don't think the cops should have known the difference, but as the fireman got there, should have known that, white smoke is usually something that's a little odd with that. The U.S. Marshals told me, they told the fire department that there was a barricaded suspect in there, and the fire lieutenant said, well, there's a fire and we're going to go probably, they might have thought he was down or, smoke inhalation, and they were going to go rescue him. Well, when that first fireman walked in, he was hit with an AK-47 round that went pretty much through his hip and out his butt cheek. So the U.S. Marshals, the joint U.S. Marshal team with NYPD went in there, returned fire. I don't believe they hit anything, but they returned fire and dragged him out. They did a fantastic job. I pull up, we caravanned, our entire team that was about to do the hit, caravanned over the bridge to that job. And I was in charge of it. That was my job. And even when the lieutenant got there from the day tour, my boss left the job to me, knowing that I had, thankfully he was knowing I had the experience to handle it. And he was fantastic. He was just a great guy. So we ran that whole job. We talked with him for about 6 hours, and the upper echelon decided to fly his mother in and to talk to him, which is like, in my eyes, I do some hostage negotiation. That's like the biggest no-no, is that you never let them talk to family. There's only two things that happen after they talk to the family: is they kill themselves or they come out shooting, or surrender, which is rare. So he shot at us 6 separate times throughout the communication or the negotiations. Well, after he was done talking to his mother, which I'm listening to the phone conversation, they put it over the radio. He comes out with an AK-47 and a bulletproof vest and decides to shoot it out with us. Well, he didn't win. We had about 60 ESU cops with M4 rifles. I had snipers up. I had K9 units in the background, in the backyard. I had everything covered, absolutely everything. I even had guys with less than lethal munitions. And, some people question me why I had a team with less than lethal munitions. And I said, what do you do if he comes out and he starts walking towards you with his hands behind his back, but he's not listening to what you're telling him. And he just keeps on advancing on you, but he's not showing you his hands. Can't shoot him. That's why you have less than lethal ready to go to put him down. So he came out shooting. We returned fire. A bunch of us got the Combat Cross, which is the second highest medal in the police department, which was an honor. And it was a great job. None of my guys got injured. Out of all the rounds fired, which were well over 30 or 40 rounds between us and him, none of us got injured. So it was a great
Two
job.
excellent guys who really don't get enough credit in the case was Nealons and Honinger. They were the overnight patrol sergeant and his driver. And very fortunate for us in that when the suspects were doing this, they got out of the car and they were running around, and Nealons and Honinger saw them. And so what are these guys doing? Because the area they're in, for your audience doesn't know Riverdale. I mean, this area it's a really nice area. It's right off the Henry Hudson Parkway. It's not a busy street. It's very tree lined. It's a really, really nice area. And the synagogue itself is kind of in an area with a lot of trees, a lot of covering. So why would you get out there, unless you had something to do with the synagogue? And they saw the passengers in the car get out and run around, and they pulled up to the red car they were driving in, and the driver, who we later identified as a guy named Muhammad Al-Faqih, they ran his plate in the police computer, had his thing, and they saw that he lived in Yonkers, which is 5 minutes away. And, they didn't pull him over. He actually, was just pull up next to him and, hey, you look lost. Oh yeah, I'm trying to find Yonkers. Really? Because you live one exit away. So I kind of got you lost. And, some informal questioning, never even a full stop where they pulled them over and did any of this. It was more of an inquiry on it. And sometimes, that's how you keep guys out of trouble. You let them know you're out there watching them and looking at them. And it wasn't until early in the morning when the caretakers for the synagogue came in and saw the broken doors and the Molotovs, that he realized, they called the police and they realized, okay, these guys were more likely than not had something to do with this crime. So, we had to go out and find them and re-interview them. They were interviewed by night watch detectives, who detectives assigned overnight to the whole borough, who were doing some cases. And, they told us about what happened. We were able to, from the computer that was in the car, we were able to pull the name, address, and the information on the car that was pulled over. So, I mean, that was just absolutely invaluable, just to have a place where you've got a car that was there. You've got these guys running around. So
Well, put this under the heading of strange, with a tinge of humor and a tinge of sadness in it, okay? I'm a newly promoted lieutenant. I'm working in Queens in a truck company. So we get a run, and it's a one-story commercial building, detached. And there's just a whiff of smoke coming off the roof. So there's no 1075, there's no 3-2 in the rescue, there's nothing, nothing. I'm second due truck. My assignment on this type of structure was to the roof. I go to the roof. So I get up on a roof, and there's a vent, ductwork, and the top of the ductwork is off. And there's a leather jacket on the roof. Yeah, somebody's trying to rob the place. So now he's going down the ductwork to get into the structure. I'm up on the roof, and now I hear, Chief, you might want to come in here and see this. Okay. Now, the guy's robbing it. That's night. It's at night. It's dark. The guy's robbing the building. So he goes down this vent, this ductwork. He gets to the bottom, and he's wedged in. And at the bottom, there's a huge fan. Now, he cannot get out. Now, the building is being used as a woodworking business. So in the woodworking business, they're using lacquers and thinners. And this big fan is used to exhaust those fumes. So now he's wedged in there. He can't move. He can't see. And he decides he's going to light a match. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I guess that goes under the class of heading of odd, strange. It's probably the strangest fire I had been to. I mean, they had to cut the vent to get him out because he was just, yeah.
Like you said, it was cold. And I think Rick Vigera and Mike Murray had the first one earlier on in the day. And I give it to the UN and the partial department down there where all the metal comes in, because if they wouldn't have tagged it or found it and started the whole operation going, somebody could have got hurt, killed, and we may have never ever responded until something blew up. But they did their job, made our job easier, because now we got Mike and Rick did the first render safe, as we call it. So now we got more intel. Then I think Charlie Hill and another individual. I'm getting old, I can't remember all the names.
Okay.
They had the second one. Then Paul and Richie had the third one. Then me and Kevin Barry had the last one. So, excuse me, it was an ongoing incident that took hours and hours. We got so much intelligence out of this. We kept, on some of the envelopes, we kept the seal from where it was shipped from, the stamping, the handwritten letters. So let other investigators do their job. And yeah, it's not talked about that much, but it was really interesting in the sorts that sometimes when you go up on a package, you don't know what it is. Could be an empty box or it could be a nuke. But this one, we knew everyone that we're going to encounter is a real bomb with a lot of energetic material inside. So that changes your mindset a little bit also. But you feed on that. And if any bomb tech tells you they're not scared, they do things like that, something's wrong with them, I guess. They shouldn't be in their career field. Because you got to have that little edge of being not fearful, but heightened awareness and being a little scared. That's okay. Because that's how you survive.
He goes, I'll give you one captain of your choice, and then I'm going to give you 4 other captains, and you and that team will build this. So I said, okay. So we went to our first meeting, and I had met with the captain. We said, look, we're going to go into this meeting, and we're going to be quiet. We're not going to say anything. We're going to listen to what everybody's got to say. Now, there was a chief in the room. There was an aide to Bernie Kerik in the room, and there were a number of other people. So we're sitting back and we're listening, and they start talking about, well, how are we going to, make these guys work, and how are we going to judge what they're doing? And so one person said, well, they'll be CompStat, so they'll be afraid of CompStat. So I didn't say anything. So the chief goes, they'll do it because I'm a chief, and if they don't do it, there'll be a problem. So at that point, I kind of lost my cool a little bit. And I start tapping on the table with my hand, and I look forward and I say, can I ask you a question? Has anybody here thought about positive reinforcement, about telling the guys what a great job they're doing as they're doing it? And they look and they go, well, they're just doing their job. I said, yeah, I know that. I said, but a pat on the back will go a lot farther than trying to beat them with CompStat or telling them I'm a chief. Nobody gets respect in rank by pointing at their lapel and going, look who I am. You have to earn that respect. And the way you earn that is by backing them and telling them what a good job they're doing. And quite honestly, from that point forward, some people were asked to leave by the police commissioner and let us take over and put the unit together. And I think by March, we had interviewed and selected, I think it was about 165 detectives, sergeants, and lieutenants of our choice. And at that time, I made a few enemies with the upper brass because there were no contracts allowed. The one thing I had asked the police commissioner was, I said, look, I said, if we're going to do this, allow us to pick the team. Don't force people down our throats. And he said, okay, you got it. And, unfortunately, some people tried to push some people on us. Listen, there's plenty of good spots for people who are on the job but aren't really looking to work that hard or be chasing sneakers on the streets. We wanted guys who were good detectives, good investigators, good supervisors who knew their way around investigations. And ironically, Commissioner Kerik at the time said, I want this unit to collect intelligence on criminal gangs the way the federal government collects intelligence on terrorist organizations. So to me, the irony there was when 9/11 happened, we were already in place and just had to shift
It
gears.
was probably about 4 months, 6 months, I think. I'm trying to remember, maybe only a couple months. It was somewhere between January and probably June of, following 9/11 that I interviewed Arafat. And it was in the midst of this, conflagration yet again in the Middle East, where it's a cyclical thing. It happens all the time. But Arafat was a central figure for decades as the leader of the Palestinian people. And there was some sense that he was losing control of them. He couldn't dictate to them how to behave if he was making deals with Americans. And that was what my interview with him was about. And he was under siege. His compound was being bombed, rubble all over the place. And I had to clamber up over rubble to get in there. And they lost their power and their medical, shipments. And Arafat was on needed medicine and water. And so that was a great interview because he was a huge figure. I mean, Arafat was a huge figure. You say the name Arafat and it was like, wow, you got Arafat? Whoa, that's nuts. And so that was a great interview because he fed me a ton of gibberish in Arabic, right? And then, the translator would give me and I know he can speak perfect English. And then he switched into English when he started getting mad. And I started getting the sound I really needed. And he's like, I am Chairman Arafat, don't tell me I don't have control of my people. I am the chairman, so that was a great moment for me to be able to like, not get under his skin, but get him to the point where I was questioning whether he really was the guy he used to be, and so getting that was really
One thing to
awesome.
say, okay, this is happening. Go out and cover it and figure out what's going on and get back to us and we'll air it at 5 o'clock. And I'm sure there was some of that in News 12 too, but in the instances where you would have to go out there and find something, what exactly would you look for and how would you find it?
I mean, I still at CBS have to pitch stories every day. So that is definitely something I'm still doing, is trying to find stories. It wasn't so much an instance of like you walk in for the day and they say, okay, we don't have an assignment of you, so go out and find what's going on. It was less about that. It was more about like, you wanted to come in with story ideas that you could start working on for that day, whether it was, maybe it wasn't turnable for that night. And this is still the case. This applies to both jobs. Maybe it's not turnable for that night, but you can start making calls and start, knocking on doors and finding out things that are going on to maybe finish it up another day or finish working another day. But yeah, for both these jobs, it's a lot of like trying to see what people in that area, whether it's the Bronx you're covering or whether it's all of New York City, what people are concerned about, what people are talking about, and what people want to bring attention to. And it's fine. It's talking to people that you met the day before and while you're interviewing them about topic A, getting in a conversation about them. And a lot of times they want to share what other thing is going on. Like, I mean, a lot of times you go out and you start on a story and people say, you really should be reporting on is XYZ. And maybe you don't do it that day, but you can look into it for another day. Or it's looking at things that are in the papers and things that are in the newspapers and trying to figure out how you can make it work for TV, or who can do interviews, or who you can find who can do interviews and make it a story localized.
Puts you back in ESU. It's a job that's made easier by the fact that you have so many great people working under you that have great control of the squads. I mean, I mentioned Lampkin, a guy like Mike Curtin, Rod Gillis, John Coughlin. All these guys are great leaders. So that part's fine. But obviously, it's still a tall task because you have 400 plus cops. You have an entire city of 8 million people to cover, and you got 10 trucks to do it. So when you're in charge now, what is Ron Wasson's game plan to not changing anything? I don't think much about ESU needs to be changed. Or going about it just fine, but making sure the mission continues to run smoothly.
Well, I think I was the first person to come back to emergency as the commanding officer. There was a few guys that came back as captains, as execs. The benefit for me was, and I always said there was no learning experience for me as a cop in emergency and going through. A lot of the commanding officers that came through were really coming through they were coming for a short amount of time. And I would say if you had no experience in the rescue world and SWAT, it takes you some time to understand what we do. A lot of our bosses had no idea of the capabilities that we had. So sometimes they were a little nervous, to say, hey, listen, we got to rig a guy on a Stokes basket and take him down 200 feet. They would be nervous about that. Are you sure you can do it? Or, hey, we're going to go in, devise a plan to go after a guy with a gun. We're going to distract him and come in this way, like when you're coming up with a plan. The advantage, I think, for me was, I went down to see one of the trucks, opened it up, went through we call it the load, what was on the truck. I wanted to see any new equipment that had been come into the unit that I wasn't aware of. And I was ready to go like that day, let's go. My fear of what we could do and what not we could do, I didn't have that fear. If I needed a helicopter, I just called one. I called for a ship. There was no hesitation. Hey, should I do this or not do it? I knew what our capabilities were. And I think that was a really big advantage. Sometimes it scared people because, I didn't need to check with people to do things. I just did them. And part of the training also going up, and I have to say, I always rely back to it. And it goes right back to Floyd Benefield. They always told us, when you get on the scene, when a cop gets on the scene, everybody's looking to that cop.
now, and you get used to that. But when you're an emergency cop, now your rank and file are looking at you to know what you're doing. So, you know, if your training is good and you keep your eyes open and you learn what you're supposed to do or how to do it. The other thing that was critical was being calm in crisis situations. And I really feel like that was a benefit that really I took really to heart. Because when things are going bad, and during 9/11 was a good example, things were, you know, couldn't be going worse. You know, many times I feared that I wasn't coming home because things that were going on the ground that were just insane. You had to be, because people are looking at you, your sergeants, your lieutenants, where are we going? How are we going to fall back? What are we doing? You know, stay calm and show that, you know, we got this. You know, this is what we're going to do. Listen to people telling you what's coming, what they're experiencing, and not like show panic. As soon as you do that, I think you lose your edge. And, you know, thank God I've been able to maintain that most of the time.
One example, I had a captain named Dave Woolley, God rest his soul, who was also murdered on September 11th, who was a real good guy. He was a Bronx fireman also. He grew up a Bronx fireman. He liked to tease me because he knew I was going to go to Rescue 3. You know, and there's always that rivalry going on. But in truth, we had tremendous respect for each other. And we had a report of a high pressure steam leak in a sub basement of a high-rise building with a worker trapped. We were first due in ladder 4. And, you know, Tim is the South Bronx aggressive fireman. And so I was put on all my gear, you know, my protective gear. I threw on my face piece. I go into the steam to try and find this guy, thinking this is easy compared to a lot of stuff I've done. Captain Woolley grabs me by the collar, by the scruff of my neck like this, and yanks me back. And he puts a wood hook in my hands. And he yells at my, because it was very loud. He's like, if this disappears, stop where you're going, stop in your tracks. And I was like, okay, Cap. And so I went into the steam again, searching, and I kept the hook out in front of me. And all of a sudden, the hook got really light in my hand. And I pulled it back where I could see it. And the hook was cut in half. And I did what he said. I stopped and I went back the other way. Anyhow, the worker guy got out from the other side. There was a door, he got out, so he was okay. So Captain Woolley's like, Tim, high pressure steam is invisible and high pressure steam will cut your head off. Like, you cannot go running like that into a high pressure steam leak. You have to be really careful. And that's why I gave you the wood hook. So Captain Dave Woolley, who teased me a lot, saved my life that day because of his knowledge of buildings, because of his building inspection, because of his experience in different types of building experience that I didn't have.
Another thing that you alluded to was humanizing, right? So there are 36,000 police officers in the city, and not a lot of people know them. And we really wanted to show that personal side, and that was never really done before. So we wanted to show, like, you know, like you said, you know, that they like sports, they have hobbies, they come from different countries, they speak different languages, and demystify them a little bit and make them more accessible, more approachable to people through social media. Because unfortunately, and we see it a lot today, people still see police officers as them, right? Us versus them. And I really wanted to break that them a little bit and see that, you know, these are men and women in your community and just very, very different backgrounds and hopes and dreams, just like everybody
You
else.
yourself have said previously, you know, that policing isn't pretty. There's intricacies to it, as we've discussed in this show. that the public doesn't know about, but is needs to be done, but is gritty and grimy. So given that, what have you told young people that want to come on this job? If there's anybody that's listening right now that wants to come on the job, what would you say?
I would tell them that now is a great time to come on a job, even though a lot of people would feel otherwise. And the reason why it's a great time is because policing is changing. Everything goes through changes in life, but right now policing is going through an amazing amount of change where a lot of the kinks are being worked out, and the opportunities are growing. A lot of this, I tell my students all the time, I've never seen police hiring at this level that I've seen it. Almost every department in the country is hiring right now. So the opportunities are grand. But when you go into policing, and I suggest you do, because I would say, and I don't know, this is not a research fact, but this is my own fact. I would say probably 99% of those that go into law enforcement have always wanted to be in law enforcement from a child. So I say this, follow your dream. Don't let anything deter you. Don't let the current climate, don't let the naysayers deter you. Go forward into policing and be the change that you want to be. So many of my students in John Jay tell me, I don't like the police, but I'm going to become a cop. And at first I didn't understand that. And then I realized they want to go in to make a change. And it's not the same change that I made, that I wanted to make. I wanted to just affect people's lives. These people want to change policing. And you have that opportunity now. We have a more diverse department than ever before. And there are opportunities for you to get to the level where you can make change. So it's a great time to get into policing, and community is the key now. So all of that transparency and getting to know the community, that's the future of policing. And it's a great.
So you're in a restaurant in the city, and sitting across from you or a few tables down from you is John Gotti, the notorious Gambino crime boss. Why don't you tell us that story?
Well, it was actually in the early 90s.
Okay.
And Syracuse had played Missouri at Madison Square Garden. And those were two teams I was connected with, two schools, because I had obviously attended Syracuse and broadcast some of their games on the campus station. And then I had been the voice of the Missouri Tigers on radio for a number of years, and I was good friends with both Norm Stewart, the Missouri coach, and Jim Boeheim, the Syracuse coach. So I went to the game, and I sat behind one bench for the first half and the other bench for the second half, so it was not to show favoritism. But when the game ended, Syracuse went back upstate to Syracuse, and the Missouri people were left. I guess they didn't fly back until the next day. And so some of them said, you know the city, where should we go for dinner? And it was late at night, like on a January night, and it was very cold and snowing. But I knew a place in Little Italy that I had frequented, and I knew they would stay open for us. So I called, and we went there, and it was getting close to midnight by the time we were finishing up our meal, and there were only a couple of tables occupied at that point. And I looked up, and who should be walking in but John Gotti, along with a couple of his henchmen. And it became obvious right away that he was a regular at this restaurant because the maitre d' rushed to greet him, and the waiter almost dropped the rigatoni in my lap. He was so distracted by Gotti walking in. It was pretty clear that he was an imperial presence there, and he was every inch the Dapper Don, perfectly coiffed, a $2,000 overcoat, perfectly tailored suit. You know, they took his coat from him as if it was the cape of a prince, and they showed him to a table not far from ours. And the people from Missouri in our group began to buzz like maybe this was something they should be concerned about. And I had to allay their fears. I said, no, unless you've done business with Mr. Gotti and in some way had crossed him or fallen into disfavor, you don't have anything to worry about. You're now in the safest place in all of New York. So a few minutes go by, and the maitre d' comes up and he says, Mr. Costas, Mr. Gotti would like to buy you a drink. And as I've told the story before, I'm thinking at this point, we probably had about enough to drink at this point. On the other hand, I put this in the category of an offer you could not refuse. So I say, okay, bring us a little more Chianti. And when the wine arrived, I raised my glass. I looked toward Gotti and I said, Mr. Gotti, thank you. And he goes, Bob, I like your work. And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to say now? I like your work too. Nice rub out at Sparks Steakhouse, highly efficient. I'm thinking that probably wouldn't be the best thing to say. So I said something like, well, thank you, Mr. Gotti. Thank you. Enjoy your evening. And he turns to his henchman. He goes, Bob Costas, sportscaster. So I turned to the people from Missouri at my table and I whispered, John Gotti, murderer.
The movie, it was inspired, of course, by a television series, and you got Colin Farrell and Jamie Foxx in it. Jamie Foxx playing Tubbs, Colin Farrell playing Crockett. You and Alex Alonso were brought in to help with that. Now, you both even had a role in the movie.
Yes.
So tell me about how cool it was to be on the big screen.
It was awesome. I mean, we, myself and Alex got called into the SAC, the SAC, the Special Agent in Charge's office. And when we get there, I believe it was Colin Farrell and Michael Mann were there, or maybe even Jamie Foxx. And then when I got there, I was like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" It was shocking for us, And Michael Mann explained to myself and Alex that he wanted to get together and make an undercover school. Both Alex and I had experience doing undercover work, and we had also taught in the academy. So we set up a school for them, with the permission of our agency, with the SAC. And we did a scenario-based school where we taught. Both of them did okay. They did really good. Colin Farrell became overly cocky, trying to do the scenario. So Michael Mann came up to me and Alex and said, "Hey, can you guys do something where you fake, like you devise some kind of thing where he thinks he's actually doing the right thing? The real thing." And I said, "Absolutely." So me and Alex, we brainstormed. And what we did was we did the scenarios where we had these two Colombian guys coming and they were going to do another purchase from us. Myself, I was playing the part of the agent on the case because he had already met me like that. I think he had not met Alex at that point. So he didn't know Alex was an agent. So what we did was we got Alex, we recorded some meetings with Alex that were all fake in cafeterias and him talking to other guys and, some pictures of planes being offloaded. And we did this ops plan. And Michael Mann asked Colin Farrell, he asked me in front of Colin Farrell, "Hey, man, you think he's good for it? You think he's willing to do it? He can do a good job." And I said, "Yeah, he could do it. He's done really good." And now Colin Farrell, being the macho man that he is, you can see he's squirming and he goes, "A real deal? I don't want to mess it up. They might know who I am." And I said, "They're not going to know who you are. These are Colombian guys. They don't even speak English, You're not that famous, So he, he sits down and he sees all these guys from SWAT rocking their rifles and everything else. And we set it up at this warehouse that was closed already. That warehouse was never going to be used again, And he goes in there and he meets Alex and this other guy that we had, Sangura Cole, Kenny Cole. And Kenny Cole looks like a stone cold killer, if you can imagine, Kenny Cole's just staring at him the whole time, just with a cold stare, So we do the undercover, everything works out. Alex gets into an argument with the guy that was with me in the room, the other undercover, and he says, "How do I know you're not a cop?" And he looks at Colin Farrell and he says, "How do I know you're not a cop? How do I know you're not wearing a wire?" So Colin Farrell rips his shirt open.
I remember that.
Yeah, he goes, "Oh, I'm not wearing a wire." He rips his shirt open, right? So the deal goes great, and he leaves. He's hugging me. He says, "I can't believe it, man. This was amazing." And everything went great. And that night, he calls Michael Mann. He says he can't sleep. He couldn't fall asleep. He was having problems sleeping. And they finally told him, "Hey, man, you got played or punked," like they like to say. And that's why they actually made a video on YouTube that's called Miami Vice Undercover about that situation that happened. And as far as being in the movie, it was an experience and a half. Myself and Alex were on set for 2 months. It was amazing. Amazing.
Is there anything you would have done differently? And if not, well, then tell me why that is the case.
Sure. Listen, it's first off the worst year ever for the history of law enforcement. I mean, everything hit us at once. Going through COVID, being forced as a police department to separate people, keep them away from one another, not allow people to gather. That probably was a mistake for police departments to be doing that. And then it led into George Floyd and all hell broke loose on us. I was out at the
was actually before the Barclays Center, that Thursday. There was a demonstration down at Union Square Park. It got violent. You know, they were throwing barriers at us. We started making collars right off the bat. One of my sergeants ended up getting knocked out, Connor McDonald. We made around, I think, 60 or 70 arrests that night. We increased our details huge for the next day. Probably could have been even bigger. Obviously, once you look at it in retrospect, at the Barclays Center, we never expected the crowds that gathered at the Barclays Center that night. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people there. And right around 6 o'clock, they started attacking us. I was standing up in the front of the Barclays Center. Everything they could throw at us, at a row of around 15 cops, was getting thrown at us. And we were doing everything to hold the line, to hold the barriers. Called in for the reinforcements, called for the SRG, which had been engaged in Manhattan, to come over to Brooklyn. Finally, when we got them in, we were able to start making arrests, start clearing it out. The cops and everyone that was there stood that line, held up when we were outnumbered, and we were able to clear it up. It took till 11 something that night to clear it up, and hundreds upon hundreds of arrests made. Leading into the next couple of days, we had a cop surrounded in Brooklyn in his car, commanding officer of the 7-1 precinct. His radio transmission was, "This may be the last radio transmission I ever make." Get him out of the car. We're over there trying to break it up. Arrests were made. He gets out safely. He get hurt. I think he's out 3/4 now based on those injuries. We continued looking for elected officials to help us on that scene, to defuse it. Jamani Williams was there trying to talk to that crowd that night. Wouldn't listen to a word he said. Pushed him out of the way to run up the block and try and destroy a couple of our cars. So we had to go out. We made more arrests there. That night on Bedford Avenue, I was out there with the Brooklyn South, some of the bravest cops and commanders I've ever been with. The street was out of a scene of apocalypse. City buses abandoned on the streets, fires, an RMP burnt. We're out there getting cinder blocks thrown at us for hours upon end. I was calling operations to get additional personnel. There were none. We had to wait around 2 hours before we were able to get a couple of teams out there. Fireworks being shot at us, cops getting hurt, getting cleaned up and coming right back to the front line again. Eventually, once we got the reserve there, we were able to move in and make a bunch of arrests over there. And that leads into to the Monday demonstration. Monday, 10,000 people or so marched down into Washington Square Park. For the most part, that march down there was uneventful. We had a group that broke off around 23rd Street. That group got a little violent with us. I was there. We made a bunch of arrests, around 20 or so from that group. The rest of the 10,000 had marched down into Washington Square. An incident takes place in the park. Tommy Galati sees a fight going on and sees a guy going into his bag, going back into a knapsack, believes the guy's about to get a gun. He's in plain clothes with one of his lieutenants. They go in, they grab the guy. As they grab him, the crowd surrounds him. One team of cops, 20 cops, come in there and form a line to get Tommy Galati out of there with the arrest. At that point now, the 20 cops are surrounded with people yelling at them in the park. So that they're lined up, but we're not protecting anything in the park at that point. We're able to get the cops out. I get them out back onto the street. We're on a little side street there. And the march is now continuing down. I believe that's 2nd Avenue over there. I'm not 100% sure. On the side street, though, all of our department cars are parked. So we can't give up this side street. I have 20 cops at this point. And now every national media station is standing there because they'd seen the incident that was taking place in the park. They are now standing on this little side street. One of the stations actually starts interviewing me about what was going on in the park. As that happens, bottles start coming from the crowd, actually hits me and hits the news guy. At which point, obviously, I push him aside. Now we're standing the line. People are advancing at our cops. We can't give the street up. I have 20 cops. I got 5,000 people on the street. Bottles are still coming from the middle of the crowd at us. It was at that point, for the first time in 3 days of this, that someone came out from the crowd, one of the leaders of this march, that tried to defuse the situation. He came out with a speaker, microphone, and started talking to the crowd, telling them this is not about the cops. This isn't what we're about. We're not, these cops didn't do anything. He was defending my cops on the scene, telling people to back out, back out. He's covered in sweat at this point in time. Turns to me for help. Chief, please help me, help me. At which point I go and I take the mic and I tell them to stop, that as a crowd of 5,000, they have to get rid of the anarchists that are in this crowd that are trying to turn everything into a fight with the cops. That the anarchists, these people from out of town who are coming in, and these were the ones that were causing 90% of the trouble that we were having, they had to be removed. If the mob, if the crowds that were out there protesting were able to remove them, then the protest could be peaceful. It was at that point, the crowd calmed down, and that individual who came out, that leader from that crowd, that came out and put himself in harm's way, put himself between the cops and the crowd, he asked me, kneel in solidarity with me. I said, I'll kneel with you. And that's what I did. And at that point, the crowd cheered and walked off, and my cops safely were able to go back. No cop got hurt. There wasn't a fight on national television that could have made the NYPD look bad. And this was something, when someone's willing to work with us, it's what we do. We do what we need to do to defuse the situation. People, if you read the comments, they were sitting at home. They weren't out there. I was out there every minute of the day. And you can ask the cops that are out there by my side every minute of the day. That was the right thing to do at that moment in time, and I do it again.
When you worked with Bobby Kennedy, the most challenging part of it was he could spot the weakness in what you were writing. He was not formally an intellectual in the academic sense, but he had a mind that could drill down beyond the kind of cliches. You say, where are you getting that from? You know, and have you thought about this? He was a very unconventional thinker. Even back in this would have been 1967. He was challenging a lot of liberal orthodoxies, but also in some ways was more radical than the liberals about things like race and poverty. The speech you're talking about was given the day after Martin Luther King was killed. Now, the most memorable speech he gave was that night in Indianapolis, where he spontaneously told a crowd in a black neighborhood, several thousand, that King had in fact been killed, and urged them not to express their anger and hate. He quoted lines from the poet Aeschylus. He asked them to go home and say a prayer. It was one of the few communities that did not experience an upheaval of violence. But the next day, it was a speech that I worked on along with his chief speechwriter, Adam Walensky, and Ted Sorensen, who had been John Kennedy's speechwriter, really about violence. And it was interesting to me because after the speech, William Buckley, a conservative, said, well, is it really true that violence has never accomplished anything? Because the tragic thing is, violence in the most horrible way imaginable has accomplished stuff. You know, what would it have been like in the Middle East if Yitzhak Rabin had not been assassinated? What would we have stayed in Vietnam if Jack Kennedy had been alive? I don't think so. Might we have ended the Vietnam War 5 years earlier if Bobby had managed somehow to get elected president? And would conditions among the less well-off of us be very different in a Robert Kennedy presidency? So obviously nobody is advocating violence. And the point of the speech was it was a corrosive, horrible evil, as we have seen now. That is, now it's worked its way into some of the more significant parts of our political process. There are people out there in Congress saying, you know, making videos showing them killing a member of the other party. There was a rally not so long ago where one of the people complaining about the stolen election was saying, when do we get to use the guns? So in that sense, you know, the menace of violence, we don't have streets riots the way we did in the 1960s. We don't have dozens of people being killed in Newark, in Detroit, and Watts. But the acceptance of violence or the flirtation with violence is very much with us.
Filling in from an officer vacancy in Ladder 7 when we responded to the miracle on the Hudson. And I was at, we went to a fire we went to a fire on the west side of Manhattan. It was a second alarm. It actually turned out to be a fatal fire. Someone that lived in the apartment where the fire originated actually was burnt and succumbed to their injuries. And it went to a second alarm, and like 3 truck made a bunch of rescues at that fire, I remember, and 1 truck. And anyway, we were the extra truck on the second alarm, and we actually worked at that fire, pretty serious fire, and we were taken up from that fire, and we had a detail by all the firehouses kind of in that Manhattan area. They had a detail bike because, you know, you get to work, you double park your car, you hope you don't get a ticket, you hope it doesn't get towed until the next shift leaves, you know, that tour gets off duty, and you try to find up a parking spot, you know, because parking is a premium even for firefighters and police officers, you know, and EMS personnel, especially in Manhattan. So you finally get yourself in a parking spot, and then if you get detailed out because, you know, somebody's short in another company, or you're the extra guy in that company, a lot of companies in Manhattan, they would use a detail bike, which was basically a bike with a big basket on it, and you could put your gear in there, and you could, like, you know, pedal to the next firehouse, you know, because the firehouses in Manhattan are fairly close, but they're close for a reason, because you can't get anywhere because of the traffic, and you have high life, high occupancy everywhere, so you need, you know, companies to be closer together there, because you just can't get in, you know, with the traffic and everything in Manhattan going on. So the detail bike got hit by a cab. You know, the member didn't get hurt, but a cab ran it over. So it was at a bike shop where the guy would, you know, fix the bikes for us. And we're sitting on the west side of Manhattan, and somebody comes up to the cab with a Ladder 7, and I'm the officer, and knocks on the window, and he goes, "Hey, there's a, you know, plane down in the Hudson River." And I was like, "Yeah, it's probably a, you know, one of the seaplanes that lands all the time by the Intrepid over there." And you know, it wasn't common, but it wasn't uncommon for Manhattan Dispatch to get calls about, you know, plane down in the Hudson, and they send a whole bunch of companies there, and it turns out to be like, you know, one of these, you know, water like tax planes, you know, one of the ones that can land in the water and take off and stuff, you know.
Right.
And I'm like, "Yeah, it's probably one of those planes." And he's like, "Okay," and then he walks on, and then another person walks up like a second later, a second or two later, and they're like, "Hey, there's a plane down in the Hudson River." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's probably one of," you know, because I'm listening to the radio, and I kind of have a view of the river from where I was sitting in the rig. The guys were in there, you know, getting the bike back and paying the guy for fixing the bike and everything. And he's like, "No, it's a big plane. I don't think it's right. I don't think it could be there." And I'm like, "Okay, thank you for telling me that." Now I'm like, "All right, let me go double check this," you know. So I kind of turn around the corner, and there is, you know, a commercial airline with people on the wings floating down the west side of Manhattan. And I wound up being one of like the companies to kind of call it in. And, you know, I remember one of the chiefs calling me and being like, "Pete, like, you know, you got a lot of people coming there. Like, you know, they give it 1060 for it and everything. Like, you got a plane down?" I'm like, "Chief, no, it's a commercial jetliner. It's like down, there's people on the wings." And we got in there pretty quick, and we wound up commandeering one of those fast ferries, and that would go out to the, you know, basically a fast ferry just came in. It was you know, offloading the passengers, and I go up onto the boat, myself and a couple other, you know, companies that were there. And I'm like, "Let's get this boat and go out to this plane and see if we can start getting these people," you know. And I could see the fireboat and the dip making its way, and the NYPD harbor units making their way. But, you know, we can't do anything on land. The boat's in the water, so let's get on the boat. Let's get on the ferry and take the ferry over there. And it was a brand new, guy that he literally just got out of the Navy like a couple of months before that, and now he got his own boat, and he was gonna, was the captain for one of the fast ferries, And I said to him, I said, hey, we got to commandeer this boat, get out there and try to help those people. And he looked at me and he goes, what does that mean, commandeer it? I said, well, we got to kind of take it over, and we need you to drive us out there so we can start getting people. And he looks at me and he goes, this is like my first, it was like his first week working with the fast ferries. And he goes, I don't know what the rules are on that, but if you're commandeering it and my boat's your boat, and it was kind of a funny moment. And he, took us out there. And my downfall with that whole operation, right, going back to the officer's rank, is after the whole thing is over, we are, everybody's grateful. The people that we got off the plane were thankful. And of course, the entire city showed up. You got people on fast ferries, on tugboats, NYPD, FDNY, helicopters, you name it. Everybody's chipping in to make this, miracle on the Hudson a miracle. And this person comes up to us and they're like, hey, I really want to take your picture. Thank you guys for getting us off the plane, and we take a picture. So I take a picture with the guys, and it just was one of those things I wasn't thinking of. We just take a picture, but we took a picture in front of the bar on the fast ferry. Woo! The next day, it hit the paper, and boom. Headquarters was calling me, like, you can't take a picture in front of a bar. It doesn't look good. I said, Chief, I totally understand that. Nobody was drinking. That was further from anybody's mind. We were there to do a rescue mission. I said, that's on me. I said, I just didn't realize the bar was in the background, Right. And, they even downtown understood that. They got a chuckle out of it, and they were like, okay, listen, you're probably going to have you've got the biggest batter boy to the biggest, okay, don't do that again in the history of the department,
So we decided to go in the apartment, and the issue entered it. And Paul and I, we were still back at the van. Our job wasn't to go in. Our job was just to be with the bomb, the bomb suits, and take care of the bomb after that. But all hell breaks loose. All I hear is gunfire. And I looked at Paul. He looks at me, and I said, "Is that shots?" Because I think so. Meanwhile, I had undressed, and I just put on my, I would say, what I wear underneath the bomb suit, just a fire retardant suit. And I took off my gun. I put it in a bag, and I put it. I was going to leave that in the car, and I couldn't get the gun out fast enough. But finally, I reached in, I grabbed the gun, and me and Paul banked heads trying to get the gun. So I took off, and Paul, he didn't even bother with the gun anymore. He just he was going to stay with me. He was my wingman, Mm-hmm. So anyway, we ran into the back, and still shots going off. We hear shots. And it's really weird, though. In something like this, it changes time. First of all, everything slows up. You can't run fast enough. You can't do anything fast enough. And it changes sound. The bullets, the gunshots weren't like gunshots. They were like little caps going off, So it distorts a lot of things. And I don't know why, but I've had it happen before. Everything gets distorted. It's sort of, I don't know why that is, but that's not the first time. Other people talked about that, when you get into that situation. Sort of distorts things. So the things are a little distorted to me. But as I'm running up, and running down a hallway from the first building, and it led out to a courtyard into the second, and then this was the second building. There was a courtyard in between the two buildings. And they were behind that building in the second building. So I'm running full speed at this door, and this one guy shows up. I hear a couple of shots. He goes down at my feet, but he's in the doorway, and I'm running so fast I can't stop. So I jump over him, and I go out and I'm out in the courtyard. And the other guy, he was standing there, and I heard a couple more shots, and then he was down, and all I could think about was, well, who can I shoot? So I look up, and there's a guy coming out of a window, but the issue is upstairs, and he decided he was going to bail out. Then he saw us all. So I pointed my gun up, and everybody pointed. So now he dives back into the window, but the issue took him. Now, whether that's what happened, I don't know, because like I said, it gets distorted. One of the weirdest things is you can have 20 people witness the same thing, and you're going to come with 20 different stories. So yep. That's just the way it is. So that's the way I saw it, and that's the way it went. Anyway, They pulled them out into the street and they took them out of there, both guys, and EMS was working on them. They were both shot up. And I went into the apartment that was there. Can't say it was an apartment. It was more like a closet. This thing was a very small, maybe an 8 by 10 foot room, maybe at the most. 2 mattresses in there, side by side, and there was a TV in the corner as you come in on the right, and that was on top of a milk crate. And then there was a bag. There was a knapsack with the bomb in it, and then there was a bag. So I looked around and I decided to take pictures of everything. I took pictures. I went outside. My CO came up, and I gave them Polaroids. And I gave them. I go, this is the way it looks now. I said, I don't know what it's going to look, but at least you have something to go on. If it goes off, you'll know what it was. So we go back in there, and we let it cook for an hour because one switch was thrown. There was 4 switches on this device, so one was already the toggle switch was a different way. So we let it cook for an hour, and nothing happened. I said, all right, now we go in. We'll look at this thing some more. And I cut open flap, picked up the flap, and all you could see was bombs and pipe bombs and wire. So there was balls of wire in there and batteries. They had the big square batteries in there. They had 4 of them. So I said, all right, we'll start with this thing, start taking this apart. And as I'm taking it apart, it's other big, and the TV and all that stuff is in my way. So I said, you don't want to remove the TV out, move that out. And then I went to pick up, it was like a milk crate that they used as a table. I went to pick that up, and there was a wire, like a filament line, like a fishing line that ran off into another bag. And Paul whacked me in the head. So I can see this thing in front of my face. No. So I looked at this line. I said, okay, I put it back down. And we got an X-ray. We X-rayed that thing, and sure enough, there's another pipe bomb in there. So like a booby trap. So now I have to stop working on the one, and then I got to go back to this because this was in my way. So I go out and I tell my boss again. I go, man, I'm going to attack the other one first. He goes, no, I want you to do the main one. I go, it's in my way. The other one's in my way. I said, if I do that, I'm going to trip the other one. I'm not doing it that way. He goes, well, I'm telling you. I said, well, I'm telling you I'm not, and that's it. So we never saw eye to eye, but where my life's concerned, I'm not listening to him. I can tell you a story about him later on, and then we went back and we finished off the secondary device, and we got that all out and apart and all that. So then we went back in for the other one. We could continue working on that one, and the way I got it is there was a fire escape outside, or a stairwell that went up. And I ran a rope through it and hooked it onto the bag, and we pulled it back to the apartment. A couple of times I got stuck. I had to go back in. I just picked it up and moved it around the outlet. Who's caught on it? Anyway, we get it out and we turn it upside down and dump everything right onto the concrete, and then took it from there. Started taking everything apart, and called for the TCV, which is a total containment vehicle. Where if the bomb goes off in it, it doesn't cause any damage to anybody. In fact, all you hear is like a little crack. That's what you hear. Anyway, we called for that. And we took it apart, and piece by piece, we put everything in the TCV and closed it up. And basically, that was the end of it. We took it up to the range and took it all apart up there in a very safe manner. We had a good manner to take things apart up there. I had tools and everything else, where I didn't have to be near it. In fact, I had big concrete walls between me and it. It went off, and I had a suit on, all that other stuff. So the danger was over as far as taking this thing apart. But we took it all apart, minus the explosives. I put all the electric back together and put electric matches onto it, and then threw the switch, and they popped off. I said, oh. But I figured they weren't very good bomb makers, but I think it was a port. I think they used one ground for all 4 devices inside that one bag, and I just think it was a bad ground, and it did go off. It's the only thing I could
find yourself in the units a couple months later. Did the fact that the squad was busy with this investigation, you feel, help you learn how to be a bomb technician quicker, given the fact that they were so busy analyzing the components of what had happened?
Yeah, being in emergency service, you learn a lot of things what the bomb squad does. And one of the first things that we were trained to do is to dress the bomb tech that's going to go down on target for the job. So that was one of the first things. And when you do stuff like that, you want to make sure that the suit's on properly, that his air's coming in. He has plenty of air coming into the helmet. He's comfortable. Everything is the way it should be. He has his tools. So it's not only his partner helps out, but in emergency, this is one of the first things that we learned. So just being with the bomb technicians, you learn, and you just like when we got into emergency, we were with people that were in emergency service, so we were kind of helping them out, anything that they needed, anything that they wanted and stuff. I remember if anybody remembers Bridget Gurney when the crane fell, and there was it was like in the 50s off of Madison Avenue, and we were asked to go up to the roof because they needed like aspirin, Advil, stuff like that, because the guys were up on this roof with a crane that had toppled over, and so we looked around and we says, this is interesting, and we ended up getting there. And the same thing like with the bomb squad, you develop a rapport. Every once in a while, we'll go to Rodman's Neck, where the bomb squad is located, when they do their render safe procedures or demolition, and you get to see these people more often, rub elbows with them, share information, and once they know what kind of person you are and this and that and everything else, and you get to know each other, it's like they call it like Truck 11, because a lot of officers, detectives that were in emergency service did go to the bomb squad if they chose to do so.
Even then, I had my eye on, I wanted to make sure I was doing my job well, but I also was working toward the next. And so when I was working as a booker for radio, where I was courting interviews for our affiliate radio stations, I would do that during my normal, allotted time. But then in my free time, I would do the job I wanted to do, which is write, as I said. So I would shadow our producer who was producing the 1 minute newscasts. And I was very friendly with her. And so I asked her to show me, how do you do the job? And so she did. And so I would sit there and pretend I was doing her job for the rest of the night. I got off at 8 p.m. I would stay until midnight every night and just write these 1 minute newscasts as if I was the producer. And luckily I had a good boss at the time who allowed me to leave my scripts for him, and he would critique my writing and send them back to me. And I continued to do that for a period of time until he said, I know you want to write, but I really think you need to consider broadcast. You have a great voice for it. You've already had some experience in it, and I think you'd be great at it. So he was the one who kind of steered me in that direction and started telling me, instead of sending me your scripts, I want you to go into the booth and I want you to record them. And I want you to send me the sound. And so that's what I started doing. And so he went from critiquing my writing to critiquing my delivery. And he was the first person who put me on air doing an American Idol podcast for Fox News Radio. Before I even really knew what podcasts were, I had one. Again, I didn't really know what I was doing at all. But that's kind of where my real start in broadcast began, I guess.
And so concludes the very best of the Mike the New Haven podcast. I want to thank all of you for helping this show become what it has in the last year. I could not have done it without you. So stay tuned for more shows and even more memorable highlights to come in 2022. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, be well, and I will see you next year. This has been the very best of the Mike in New Haven